Support for User Defenders is provided by Adobe XD. Adobe XD reimagines how designers create user experiences for websites, mobile, and more. Try it free at userdefenders.com/XD.
We all have this amazing potential. And if you can imagine that this seedling is going to become a tree, what kind of tree is it going to become? Is it going to be this like full-fledged, completely magnificent, like grand tree? Or are you going to have your inner critic snipping away at buds that might grow and branches and everything so that it looks more like a bonsai? That's what the inner critic does. It snips away kind of at your potential and the fullness of your expression.
Welcome to the User Defenders podcast, where we interview UX superheroes who fight for the users in order to inspire and equip you to do the same. And now, here's your host, Jason Ogle.
Greetings, User Defenders. Welcome to part 2 and the conclusion of my inspiring and empowering interview with Denise Jacobs. Denise is such a generous soul as she agreed to record the second half of this conversation the same day she had to catch a flight for an out-of-country speaking engagement. Thanks so much for taking the time, Denise. There's so much value and insight ahead in this important conversation on silencing our inner critic. Who wants to hear an iTunes review? This one's from Anriek. Fight on, 5 stars. Jason and the Defenders have made my 1-hour commute to work every day a joy instead of a hassle. I feel my own superpowers growing with every episode. Thank you, Jason, for the awesome insights into the field of UX design. Now, on into the fray. Fight on. Oh, I love that. That was so great. Thank you for leaving that review. That is amazing. I love your enthusiasm too, and that the show is helping your commute be a little better. And I love what Zig Ziglar said. He said, my car is a rolling university. So I think you feel the same way, my friend. Thank you for listening. And you fight on too. Defenders, please leave a rating and review on iTunes. It's pretty simple. You just go to iTunes and you type UX or User Defenders and just leave a rating and review. Even if you don't want to write anything, please click the 5 stars. It really helps keep the show in a nice ranking for other designers to find it. And you know what? I might even read it on a future episode. Thanks so much in advance, and please enjoy the conclusion of my inspiring interview with the one and only Denise Jacobs. Welcome back, User Defenders. We are here. We're live. You're hearing this later, but Denise and I are here again, and we are going to continue and actually wrap up this conversation. It was so rich, the first part, that thankfully Denise agreed to come back to wrap this up with part 2. So I am so grateful, Denise, that you've come back and to wrap this wonderful, compelling, and very relevant conversation up with us.
Oh, of course, it's my pleasure. How many times do people go, oh, no, you have to come back for a second interview? Yes.
Well, awesome. And Defenders listening, I just want you to know just how gracious Denise is. She's actually flying out today on this day to speak. I think I thought it was out of the country, perhaps. Is that what I understood?
I'm flying to Campinas, Brazil.
Oh, my goodness. So... Yeah. Imagine that, like she's got all these things she's trying to get out the door, but she agreed to take this time today to make this happen because this was the only other opportunity we'd have for probably at least a month or so after. So thank you so much, Denise.
Again, my pleasure. I had a great time talking last week, so we just have to do it again.
Awesome.
Get to do it
awesome.
Again.
Yes, we get to. I love that. So I want to kind of jump back in, and I can't remember exactly where we left off. I remember the last thing I said was, "Oh my gosh, I got to go to physical therapy," and I made the conversation start a little late because I had to water the chickens because they were dying, I think, in the side yard here. So I was hearing them, and that would have made it into the recording. So anyway, the only problem I have now is I have a fly in the garage somewhere. And I was telling Denise, it just made me think of that Breaking Bad episode where, there was a fly in their meth lab, but we're making awesome radio here. We're doing something way better than cooking meth.
Mm-hmm. I guess it depends on who the in person is. They'd be like, yeah, I don't know.
That's subjective.
Radio, right? Yeah, to each his own.
That's a
Tomato,
good point.
tomato.
Yeah. What is success to you? Right. Like that's kind of the question you'd ask that person.
Right. What is success?
What does success mean to you?
That's hilarious.
Oh goodness! So we're talking all about banishing the inner critic, and I love how. I love how you call it the inner critic too, because we also know it's AKA imposter syndrome. So I just think I feel like the inner critic is a really neat term as well, and it's something that you don't hear as much on all the podcasts and everything. But we certainly all have, any of us who are creative, and I wager everybody listening to this has a creative. Everybody's creative. Every single person on the face of this planet is creative.
That's
right.
right.
And I think it's just a matter of whether you believe it or not. And I think again, Denise's book will help you believe if you're not a believer. And that's God's honest truth right there. So let's jump into creativity. Why do so many people, and this is totally, this goes along with the inner critic part of this, is why do so many of us think that we aren't creative?
I think it's just, I can't remember if it was Sir Ken Robinson's, TED Talk, or this is one of those stories that's traveled around a lot, and I'm not even sure the origin. But apparently there was a study done where they took a group of like 4 or 5 or 6 year olds and asked them, how many of you guys are creative? And 80% of them raised their hands and like, me, definitely, totally me, right? Came back 10 years later. I think they were 6 or 5 or 10. Anyway, came back 10 years later. So now they're either 14 or 15 or 16. I think they're in the 16 age range, and same group of kids. And they're like, okay, how many of you think you're creative? 20% raised their hand and 80% said that they weren't. So somewhere over the course of the 10 years or, 10 years plus that we're in elementary school and then middle school and high school or whatever, the school levels are in the country that you grew up in, somewhere along the line, we get creativity kind of like beaten out of us, I feel like, or discouraged or criticized or whatever. And we internalize that stuff. And then we start to tell ourselves, I'm not creative. And then also, I think that there's a very, very narrow definition, especially in school and stuff like that, of what creativity is. Creativity is the arts, right? Like the myth is that creativity is the arts. So if you're not a person who draws or paints or does music or writes, somehow, if you're not an artist, then you're not creative. Right. And so when people don't identify themselves as artists, then they start to automatically think, well, I'm not creative, and so like if there's, people who are, and I think that is starting to change. Like we were talking about last time where, like kind of younger generations, thankfully don't seem to be as constrained by labels and don't seem as quick to label themselves as older generations have. So like I feel like this kind of like gender fluid, kind of queer label is, or identification is kind of a good example of it, where they're just like, yeah, whatever, like masculine and feminine and men and women and just yes to all the things. And why do I have to choose? Like, why do I have to just do one thing? I'm all kinds of, I'm a whole spectrum of, interests and desires and attractions. And like, why would I have to choose? And I feel like kind of also that, from on a professional level, there's kind of like the rise of the designer coder or the coder designer, or, people who are just like, why can't I be a technical person who's also like visually creative? Or why can't I be a person who's creative within this context? And so I'm really, really heartened to see that sort of things where people aren't putting labels on themselves, but there still are people. And I've talked about this in my book where people will say, I'm not creative at all. And I always say to that, first, balderdash. because
Amen.
how many times do you get to say balderdash in a conversation? Not
so
many.
Glad you said that.
So you really have to take the opportunity when it presents itself.
Yes, absolutely. Word of the day, Defenders. Word of the year.
Balderdash. And so, so to that, or poppycock, which I think is another good one. So I say all of those wonderful words that basically mean I don't believe it. And then what I like to do is I like to challenge people, and I like to say, okay, if you think you're not creative, okay, when's the last time that you did something that was so enjoyable that you lost track of time? And they'll be like, oh, so-and-so, I was doing this, this, and this. And I'm like, okay. And, why do you think that was? Or why do you think you enjoyed it so much? Well, I was figuring out how to make this, and this work together and do this. And I'd be like, okay. And how is that not being creative?
Right.
And then that's when people are like, well, I guess that I could be creative. It's like, yes, that's because that's what that is.
Yeah.
That's creativity.
I love how you put that. And you kind of triggered something in me about fear. And I think I think people deep down inside know they're creative. I just feel like we're afraid.
I think we're afraid because
right?
there's been so much pressure put on it. Like you can't, I remember when I was younger, that there was a point where, I'm a recovering perfectionist. I realized it's deeply personality from a very young age. And I remember I really liked to sing. I still really like to sing, terrified to sing in front of people, but I loved singing. And I used to be mortified when people would sing songs and they didn't know the words or they didn't remember the words. And I remember thinking to myself, well, why bother singing the song if you can't sing it right? And I think that is probably a sentiment that a lot of people have with doing something creative or creative expression. Well, I shouldn't do it if I can't do it right. Or I have this idea in my head, and if I can't realize the idea in my head, then why bother doing it? Do you know what I mean? Or if I can't execute it well, or if I can't execute it perfectly, or if it doesn't meet the standards, this, externally imposed standard, then I probably shouldn't bother.
It's like when you're growing up and you're singing a song and it's your older brother or sister or sibling says, you're singing it bad, right? But you're trying and you don't care.
Oh, you're off key.
You're off key. You don't know the words. Your older sibling is like, hey, do you know who sings that song? And then you're like, yeah, Pat Benatar. And then they're like, well, yeah, let's keep it that way. Right. It's like,
right.
And I think that's kind of one of those first sort of blows to our bravery in being expressive and being creative. And it's just kind of a series of things that happens over time. And you really do have to have thick skin for this stuff. You really do. Right.
It reminds me, I don't know if you've ever seen this video on Facebook. It is one of my favorite videos. One of my favorite things that I've seen in a long time is these little girls. I think they're over in Eastern Europe, in Russia or someplace, Eastern Europe-y, that part of the world. These little girls are in little girls, 3, 4, 5-year-olds. And they're in this dance class and they got little, ballet tights and tutus and leotards and stuff like that. And they're warming up. And there's they've got this dance music on and they're warming up and they're the teacher's running them through all the exercises to warm up. And there's this one little girl who was I am feeling this music. And she's she's so into it and she's dancing. And then she's she knows all the steps ahead of time. So she's doing them kind of before the teacher asks them, but she's doing it with just expression and exuberance. And then you see somebody saying to her, no, do the thing. And she looks over and she's like, all right. And she tries to tone it down. And then she's like, oh man, this song. And she's dancing. It is so it was one of those swings, or you can imagine that there are kids like that that are just like, oh my God, this is my jam. I'm going to dance, or I'm going to, this idea, or I'm going to draw this thing. And then there's always somebody off to the side that's like, no, calm down, tone it down.
Yeah, the critics. I love what Tim Ferriss says. There are no statues erected for critics.
Mm-mm.
Right?
No, there aren't.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We got to have that balance. I was just saying we got to have thick skin, but we also have to have soft hearts. I feel like that's the kind of the tightrope walk for us as creative people, because we do have to have thick enough skin to not let what the critics say derail us and deflate us to where we just lose our bravery and just kind of just go into hiding, because we need to. It's a disservice, defenders. It's a disservice to humanity if you don't express your creativity.
Amen.
Right?
I am, and it's a great book called Die Empty.
Yes.
And which I actually haven't read, but I've read enough about it to know that I'm like completely on board with the concept, right? You come here with something inside of yourself, and your goal in life is to make sure that stuff that's inside of you is no longer like you've extinguished it, like you have expelled it all, kind of like a toothpaste tube. Like you don't want anything left in that toothpaste tube. You want to squeeze everything awesome that's inside of you out and put it out into the world.
I love that, because once you squeeze toothpaste out, you can't put it back in the tube.
You cannot put it back in the tube for want of love or money. You cannot do it. And so here's an interesting thing that I want to share that kind of, I think, that kind of has to do with that, and could also have to do with the inner critic as well. But I just had this realization yesterday, and kind of ongoing series of realizations over the last few weeks, that when you don't take care of yourself, when you don't really respect yourself and do the things that you need to do to be able to show up powerfully in the world, then you're doing everybody else around you a disservice, because you can't help them do the same, right? Like when you hold yourself back, it's like you hold everybody else back, and your actions don't just affect, like your lack of self-confidence and your inability to believe in yourself and believe in what you're capable of, and to know that you've got something special to offer the world, means that anybody you're working with, anybody that you're around, like that then these people, that affects them as well, right? Like, so like, for example, like I just realized, it was one of those, it's a very simple thing, but I realized that in my business, if I don't ask for the amount of money that my work is worth, then that means I can't pay the people who, I can't pay my contractors. I can't pay the people that work with me. I can't move forward, and I can't launch ideas in the world that may help folks. I can't have experience, like I can't show up fully to my life because I'm in a place of stress all the time about finances. I can't do the thing. I can't squeeze toothpaste out of my tube because I'm so busy just like trying to survive, right? But when you work and you get to that place where you're like, no, wait, what I do is valuable. People need to hear, like, I'm going to affect the world in a positive way. I'm going to value myself, and I'm going to, like, it changes everything. And it changes what you're able to, how you feel about yourself, and it changes what you're able to do, and it changes how many people you're able to affect.
I'm so glad you said that, Denise. I love what Jeff Goins says. He wrote a book called Real Artists Don't Starve, which is really was a great read as well. He says, don't make art to make money to make more art. Right. And so I think that's the idea there. And I realized that hosting this podcast and producing it, and A lot of work.
A lot of work.
Oh my goodness, it is. And it costs money. Every episode costs me several hundreds of dollars. I don't think a lot of listeners realize that, but it costs me several hundreds of dollars to put episodes out. And thankfully, I've had wonderful sponsors come along and help make that happen, partner with me to help make that happen. And I'm realizing that, I do have to, and we all do, all of us have to be confident when we're asking for more money to what we're worth, the money that we're worth. We need to be confident in asking for that, because just like Denise just so well articulated, it helps us produce more art for more, to help more people. It's a wonderful cycle.
And there is money. And that's the other thing that I think is also, so kind of back to this inner critic kind of what I call kind of creativity denial and all this stuff. And this mythology that, we've internalized that turns into the inner critic is this whole thing about, like artists starve. And I'm just like, well, actually, let's like take an actual de facto look at this. There are a lot of artists. When artists do well, they do really, really well. Beyonce is an artist.
Yes.
She's doing just fine.
She's okay.
Right? She's doing okay, right? She is able to do this thing. And so I feel like this mythology about, well, like you're not going to be able to do the thing. It's like, no, it's just cracking the code with it. It's just, going and figuring out, because there's a lot of money available to support people in their creative endeavors, like a lot. Like there are a lot of, for example, like there are a lot of companies that are like, yeah, we'll sponsor your podcast. We sponsor podcasts. We do that. Like we have money literally set aside and waiting for somebody to come and ask us, or for us to have the relationship to be able to do that. Like it's literally sitting there and it's waiting for it. Like they have budgets for sponsorship.
It's marketing budgets. That's exactly what it is. Marketing
budget.
Yep.
So it's not like it's this impossible thing where you're trying to, like crack the Da Vinci Code or something like that. Like it's literally like it's already apportioned and there. It already exists.
And the reality is it goes away. If it doesn't get used, it goes away at the end of the year.
Sometimes it does, because it doesn't get used in that year. And it was like that budget just sat there lying fallow.
Yep.
And it's like when people are just like, like people have training budgets. It's like, so they need people to come in and conduct trainings in their company.
Precisely. Yeah. And that reminds me, I need to ask about that. I haven't seen, we need to do some training this year. The year's almost over. So yeah, that's great encouragement, Denise. Defenders listening, check in on that with your superior. Check in on that about training budgets, for sure. That's great advice.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's just one of those things where it's like, there are resources. I'm not saying that, you just like, I mean, and I'm also not even going to say that it's hard to find the resources or it's difficult to get them, because, like I think I don't know if we talked about this, about my book deals, both of my book deals were very serendipitous and fell into my lap. And I had spent many years beforehand thinking that it was going to be really hard to get a book deal and all this stuff. And part of it was because my father, who was a very accomplished person, but to my knowledge, never tried to write and publish a book. But my father, when I graduated from college, when I told him I was interested in being a writer, potentially, he said, "Do you know how hard it is to get published?"
That was the first thing he said, huh?
Yeah, that's the first thing he said. Not like, "Oh, that's a worthy thing." Oh, like, who is your inspiration? Like, what do you want to do? What kind of things do you want to write about? What do you want to do? Yeah. Do you know how hard it is to get published? And
how'd that make you feel?
What the appropriate response would have been? Do you know how hard it is to get published?
Right. Yeah.
Because my dad did
it's all hearsay.
A lot of amazing things. But trying to publish a book, I don't believe was on that list.
Wow.
Building 3 airplanes from scratch by hand. Yes.
Right.
Flying airplanes, being the first person in his family to graduate from high school and college. Check. Doing a life career change from being an aeronautical engineer to be a doctor of optometry? Check. Writing and publishing a book? Not so much. So that's the other thing too. We get these kind of internalized inner criticisms because people in our lives who are authorities and whose, opinions and values and ideas and advice we really trust and rely upon.
And by the way, who are well-intentioned.
And who are well-intentioned.
Yeah.
I don't think he said that to me because he thought, that I wasn't a talented writer. I think he said that to me because he didn't want to see me being disappointed by what other people did. He
was trying to protect you, kind of like what our inner critic tries to do.
Yeah, and that's exactly what the inner critic tries to do. Yeah. And this is what happens. The inner critic models how it sees how other people try to, quote, protect us. And sometimes people are not protecting us. Sometimes they're being mean, like peers and stuff like that. But, and then it goes, okay, I'll set up the ramparts and I'll, get it all set up the same way and I'll act the same way when I see potential threats. And, but the little inner critic's it's just too good. It's just too quick a study. It's too good at modeling bad behavior and incorrect messages. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we really, I definitely believe that, it's our duty, in order to be able to move forward into our lives more powerfully, it's really beneficial for us to, first of all, recognize the inner critic, and then to have tools at our, I want to say behest, but behest isn't the word that I want, but at our available and accessible, just a toolkit to be like, oh, okay, I see what you're doing. Okay, this is what I have in response to that.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so you're coming at me and you're saying you're not, I'm not creative. Okay, how I'm going to counter that. Oh, you're like, okay, you're telling me that I shouldn't do this because people are going to judge me. All right, this is what I have to say to that. This is what I'm going to do.
I like where this is going because you give some really. First of all, I want to say the one thing about protecting. I feel like William Hung's parents should have tried to protect him a little bit more.
Who's William Hung?
Can you feel the love tonight? It is where we are.
He's an American Idol reject, probably the most popular one.
Oh, really? Because he just
cannot say.
Oh, bless his little cotton socks.
Bless his heart, though. But he's really creative. He came from civil engineering, so super smart guy, really creative in that area. But it just the singing thing may not have been for him. He just was creative in other areas, is all as I'm saying. So yeah. But I don't know why I said that. I feel like kind of like that was maybe like a little bit mean. I'm sorry.
Well, you can do whatever you want with that one.
Yeah. Well, I love what you said about naming your inner critic. And that's, that's kind of where this conversation was heading. And it's like calling it out when you hear it, when you hear that voice in your head, that unwelcome voice, call it out and give it a name. And just kind of, I love it because this is brain science. This is all brain science here. And you dive a lot deeper in the book about this stuff too. But I just love that advice. I think that's really helpful. And I'll be honest with you, Denise, after I read that, I started practicing this, and it is actually really helping me a lot.
Really?
Yes, it is totally helping me. Like I gave mine a name. Mine's name is Skip.
Skip.
Yeah. So anytime Skip starts trying to talk to me and tell me things that I don't want to hear and I don't need to hear, frankly, then I will call him out and I'll say, I know you're trying to get me, Skip. I know you're trying to. I'm going to skip this. Right? Nice. I'm going to skip this feedback because it's unhelpful. Denise, do you have a name for your inner critic?
I don't have a name for my inner critic. Years ago, I before I started doing all this inner critic research and stuff like that, I was thinking about it as like your lizard brain.
Yes.
And so I said that I have these kind of two these entities inside of me that are trying to play it safe all the time, and one of them's name is Norma, and she's a lizard, and she is like, let's not try to do let's just try to be normal. I'm Norma, and I'm just trying to be normal, not trying to like stand out or make any waves or do anything to like draw extra unwanted attention to myself. And I'm just going to kind of play it small and normal and all this stuff. And, it's interesting because and I think on a lot of times when my inner critic pops up, it will be like, well, just tone it down, like people are going to be overwhelmed. Like just, because it's like people are going to be overwhelmed by, I'm 6'1". I don't know if you know this, but I'm 6'1". And so I'm an incredibly tall woman. And, even for a man, that's a tall height, but for a woman, that's particularly tall. And I'm very, very aware of my kind of stature. And then I have short hair. And so I'm aware of that. And there was a period in time in my life, I don't know what was happening, but people were calling me sir a lot.
Oh.
Because they weren't paying attention. They basically would see a tall black person with short hair.
Yeah.
And they'd be like, and not only would they do that, but then they would also act nervous around me. Like I was going to somehow be an aggressor because I am a tall brown person, right? Of indistinct gender. It's very interesting. That was happening a lot when I was heavier, and then I lost a lot of weight. And then there were times like I was like, I very clearly like have a woman's body. Like it's not like indistinct at all. And a couple of times somebody like, again, wasn't paying attention, called me sir. I've come out of women's bathrooms. I've been in women's bathrooms and had women walk in, stop, turn, look at the door sign to make sure, and then come in.
Wow.
So having just grown up, being taller than average and all this stuff, and then also being African American and all of the things, I've learned that I have to disarm people. I have to figure out, I have to have a lot of ways, I have a lot of strategy that are, a lot of them are subconscious, that I disarm people so that they don't feel threatened by me immediately.
Design and build interactive prototypes, update artwork, and test your experiences, all without having to upload, sync, or jump back and forth between apps. Adobe XD is available for both Mac and PC and integrates with Adobe Creative Cloud libraries, meaning that no matter what your team configuration, XD has you covered. And now you can get Adobe XD for free. Just go to userdefenders.com/XD to learn more. Wow. I appreciate you sharing that, Denise. Thank you so much for your vulnerability. I want to know, like, how does that make you feel? Like, how do those events, and scenarios, how do it make you feel?
Sometimes it's just tiring. It's tiring to kind of always try to be aware of what I think people like. It's exhausting. It's exhausting. Mm-hmm. It's exhausting to try to always be nice, to like feel like I can't have a bad day, right? Like I can't be in a bad mood because that could be something that could be like detrimental for me. Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah. Like there's a whole thing about angry Black women and all this stuff. And it's like, if you're too strong, if you're too opinionated, if you're too forceful, then it's like all of a sudden, if you've got a strong opinion about something, all of a sudden you're angry. It's like, no, I'm just actually stating an opinion. Oh, it's like, you're just, you're so angry and I didn't mean anything by it. And I didn't, and like, wow, exhausting.
Yeah.
Every moment of the day. And sometimes it's like, I don't think about it. And like, there's a lot of times where I'm a super friendly person. I'm nice. I'm smiley. I chat with people all the time. I pet dogs and I like babies and all of this stuff. And that's just naturally who I am. I'm like a big kid. But it's sad to feel like I kind of have to sometimes turn that up to 11 just so people won't, like I said, so people won't feel threatened by me like I did. I'm super extra nice. Sometimes I don't always want to be like extra super nice. Sometimes I just want to like be in my, but it's like, got to make sure. Oh, okay. Thank you so much. Have such a great day. Oh my God. I love your t-shirt. That is just the cutest thing. Woo, child. And sometimes I'm just like, so that's real. And like for people who are just like, I don't think that's a real thing. And it's like, that's because you don't have to do that all the time. That is a real thing. You can ask, first of all, any black woman about whether she has to tone herself down at work. And she will say, absolutely, because if not, then somebody's going to say that I hurt their feelings and then it's going to be my fault. And I was like, I don't know if you're familiar with a writer named Lovia J.A.
No.
She has this great, you should follow her. She's great. She's got a blog called Awesomely Loving. She talks about popular culture and all this stuff. She's actually literally African-American. She was born in Nigeria and moved here at the age. And so she's African and American. Huh. And so she's got, a great perspective on everything. And she wrote a post about the something about like the power of white women's tears or something like that, kind of after the barbecue Becky thing of the woman. Like, did you hear about this?
No.
This woman, police, she was in Chicago or some city. She was at a park. She saw a black family barbecuing at one of the public barbecue things at the park. She called the police because she was uncomfortable.
Oh, dear God.
That there was this black family there using the public barbecue thing. And then when they somebody look it up. She's called Barbecue Becky.
Okay.
Look it up. Then they filmed her as she the police, she called the police and they filmed her being on the phone and stuff. And then, the police came and she started crying. And then everybody's all like, oh, we're so sorry. You just called the police on an innocent group of people and you're crying. So Lovey wrote this post and it's Jason, I'm going to tell you, you're going to read this and you're going to get so angry.
I'm already angry.
Story after story after story of women who were like, yeah, I made a complaint, this woman was always being hard on me at work. Finally, I just, I stopped being nice to her. She got upset about it, went to HR, started crying, and then they asked me to change my behavior. Story after story after story after story.
Jeez.
It is so disturbing. You're just like, what? And then for me, then I start looking back and I'm like, how many times have things like that happened? Where I complain and people are like, oh, that's nice. But Piper said this happened, and so it's got to be true for what she said. All right.
This is just I don't have any words.
I
think it's related. I think it's related because this all stems from fear. It all stems from fear. It all stems from the internal critic. Somebody who's making these allegations, is making these prejudices, are afraid. And it's all stems from that inner voice in their head. That's just, for some reason they feel inadequate. They feel like they're not good enough. And so they have to make somebody else miserable. It's always the person that's doing the inflicting that is the one that's hurt the most. That's in the most pain.
That's hurting. That's right? Hurting a lot. Right?
That's hurting others. Hurt people. I love, that's what Sean Stevenson said. He said, hurt people.
It's so true. And so, one of the things, just to kind of get back to the book, one of the reasons that I felt like this work and all of this was so important was because we have kind of these big wells of hurt that we carry around all the time that affect our behavior, and that they affect our behavior subconsciously. So we don't even know that this stuff is happening, that it's in the background, and yet it's keeping us from, sharing that idea in a meeting because we think that somebody's going to criticize it. We're afraid that somebody's going to criticize it, and we don't want to hear it, and then we second guess ourselves, and we don't think it's that good anyway. Or it keeps you from, creating that design or creating that kind of more innovative solution to like getting through a user workflow, or, it keeps you from applying for that job, that, senior, UX lead or whatever, and just staying in the place that you are because it's okay, or just moving laterally instead of never moving forward, right? We have all of this stuff, and we have all of these beliefs, and the sad thing is that everybody's got them. Nobody talks about them, and nobody gives you tools to actually deal with them, right? Like tools that actually are based on something that is substantial, and not just think positive thoughts and say a bunch of affirmations, which, by the way, affirmations actually do work, but only in particular cases and for particular reasons, if they're structured in a certain way, which is actually based on research. And so nobody does this. And so for me, I felt like it's important to be able so that people can do that, squeeze that toothpaste out of the tube. So people can be start to realize their potential, and that they can really get all the goodness out of them out into the world. That we need this toolbox, we need this toolkit, we need these practices, and we need to know that it's possible. Not that it's possible on an aspirational level, but that it's possible on a scientific level, that our brains naturally can do this stuff with a little bit of training.
That's right. Neuroplasticity. You talk about that in the book. I love that's more of a recent discovery too, and that's wild to me in the field of science and even in medicine. It's so surprising to me that that's more of a recent finding, that our brains actually have the capacity to change, and it all lends itself to that growth mindset. And there's you talk about it in your book. Defenders, pick up Banish your inner critic. I'll have a link in the show notes. Don't wait. It's an awesome investment. It is incredible. And I'm not just saying that because Denise is on the other line. I am loving the book. I'm almost done with it. It's incredible. Yeah, it's amazing. So, but I also want to mention Daniel Amen's work, Dr. Daniel Amen. He wrote a book called Change Your Brain, Change Your Life. And he's one of the first neurologists that actually has taken brain scans of people who are kind of having signs of Alzheimer's and things like that, and he kind of he puts certain folks who were kind of in that risk factor area. He put them on a certain kind of regiment, and then he kept taking pictures of their brain, and he saw it with his own eyes. He saw that these the brains were growing and changing and actually getting healthier, and so that's like a cornerstone. I think that's a keystone of the theme here, is that Defender listening, if you are in this place where you just feel like you're just at the bottom of the barrel with how you feel about yourself and your creativity and your contributions, just take heart. You can change your brain if you really, really desire to. So just take heart in that. Be encouraged.
Yeah. But so you said you had questions for me. You had questions from
yes,
from listeners and stuff?
Yes, and I'm so glad you said that. It's a perfect segue, because I this is a good question that kind of veers into where our conversation's been going. And this person, his name is John Drinkhahn, and he wants to know, he says,
"Hi Jason, this is John. My question is, how do you honestly judge or critique your work if you're fighting against low self-esteem?"
It's an interesting question.
That is actually a really good question. I think the first kind of thing that came to me is to fall in love with the process and worry about the product later, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, do
So,
elaborate.
No,
I
go
think
ahead.
it does make sense to me. Elaborate. If you could elaborate on that. I think I have my own kind of idea of what you mean by that, but I'd love it. I'd love it if you could elaborate on that.
So a lot of times when you're so worried about what you're making or what the outcome is going to be, that you don't focus on how enjoyable the process of making said thing is. And so if you put your energy and your focus on really enjoying the process, really enjoying the finding all of the parts and putting things together, and basically kind of like the problem solving part of the process, then I feel like it changes how you view what you made, because what you end up making ends up being something that you're really proud. You're like, this solved the problem. Is it perfect? No. Is it like the best thing I've ever done in my entire life? Does it matter? Like, I solved the problem, or like my objective for, solving what my goal was, I did that. And then I feel like that kind of transforms or affects, helps you to see what you made differently. If you're just kind of rushing through the process and you're trying to get to this like kind of perfect end point, and then of course you're going to be judging it based on I don't think how you would necessarily judge it, but how your inner critic judges it, right? Like, that how you feel other people from the outside would look at it and put their own kind of opinions on it. But I feel like when you're really in love with the process and what you actually go through in making whatever it is, then I feel like it changes how you feel about what you've made.
I really like that a lot, Denise. And it kind of made me think of, I talk about this fella a lot, particularly because he created the Discovery MRI system for GE, and it was meant for kids because he did a lot of research. He was a designer. He is a designer, and he designed this thing. His name's Doug Dietz, and I talk about Doug a little more in Joe Johnston's episode. I think it's episode 46. We talk a lot more about this, but just to touch on the process and kind of what I'm feeling on your response there, which I love, is I bet you he fell more in love with just the process of getting to know, of watching these kids literally suffer in these adult MRIs. I've been in MRIs, and I had to hit the panic button. It's terrifying in there. Oh yeah.
Wow.
And I only had like 5 minutes. I had like 5 minutes left. I'm like, I just can't do this anymore. And I hit the panic button. It's terrifying. It's small. If you're claustrophobic, even a little bit, it's just terrifying. And then you're like in this cave and you're only about 4 feet in, but it feels like you're like, 30 feet in, to this thing. And you hear these loud noises around your head, and it's just droning, and it's awful. It's an awful experience. So this designer named Doug Dietz, he was watching these kids, many of them terminally ill with cancer and things. Right. He was watching them like they're already suffering, and he's watching them do these tests they have to do all the time. And he's watching them just terrified of getting into, and understandably so, getting into this thing. So and this is an assumption, granted, but I have a feeling that he fell more in love with just the process of researching, of just getting to know these kids and what they were experiencing, than what he even knew that he was going to create.
Right. Yeah.
Would you? Does that make sense?
I definitely think so. I mean, like I was, thinking of it from the perspective of when I was writing, actually, Banish Your Inner Critic, and I had a bit of writer's block, or what certainly felt like writer's block, and I hired a writing coach. And one of her recommendations for me was in order to kind of like just relax myself and relax my brain before I started writing, was to do something with my hands. And she was like, what's something kind of creative that you could do with your hands that you are interested in doing? And I was like, I want to make earrings so badly. I don't even know what to do with myself. And she was like, all right, make earrings. And so I would make earrings without a goal. Like, I mean, I knew I was going to make a pair of earrings, but I didn't sit down and design them ahead of time. I didn't plan which beads I was going to use or anything. Like the only time sometimes I would be like, sometimes I wouldn't even plan colors. Like I would just start pulling out beads, and whichever ones that I thought kind of spoke to me or something was where I would start. And then I would just keep adding to it, and I would just keep doing it. And so the process itself of making the earrings was more important to me than the earrings that I ended up making. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I fell in love with the actual process of choosing the beads, which ones I was going to use, and then figuring out how I was going to attach the different parts of it, and like just discovering how it was going to work out, or like having it reveal itself to me, because it's almost like it was already existed. Then it was just like, okay, you're ready to hear what I have to say. This is what I want to be. And I was like, great. And I didn't know what I was going to do until I did it. And then I knew the next thing, and I knew the next thing. And then I would get an idea and I'd be like, oh, what if I try this? And that process became so enjoyable that, like, I didn't, when at the end I loved the earrings themselves, but it was because the process was to get to there was so enjoyable.
Absolutely. That makes so much sense. I put a sink and a toilet in, and I've put I've never done that before. I've put a toilet in, but I've never put a sink in with an actual like countertop and like a working faucet and connected the water line I've never done any of that. And so, but using my growth mindset, there it is again, Defenders, using my growth mindset, I said, I know I can do this. I know I can do this. And I watched some videos on YouTube. I looked at the instructions that it came with, and I was like, I'm going to do this. And I did it. And every time I wash my hands in that sink, I just feel a sense of pride. I feel a sense of accomplishment. Right. So it's like, even if, of course I would have been really upset if it didn't work. But I'll be honest with you, I still would have been proud that I got everything else done up to that point, that I got, the sink, the countertop, adhered to the cabinet, and that I got the water lines connected. I would feel really proud of that. I went through this process and I learned more. I used that neuroplasticity that our brains are designed with, and I was able to kind of make new neural pathways. And I think that is the whole point. To me, like what you're saying, Denise, is, enjoy the journey far more than the destination. A huge cliche, but I think one of the most important ones that we overlook so often in our busy lives and distracted lives.
I think so. And then I was going to say too, as I was talking, I remembered something else, which I may have forgotten since I remembered it. But in terms of being worried about kind of what other people think, and kind of the being afraid of being judged, I think I was going to say something kind of in relationship to that, because I think that's the other thing. Like when your self-esteem is low, it's like you're seeing yourself and you're seeing what you're doing from the outside of what other people, what you kind of believe other people would be thinking. I mean, I know that's true for myself. When I'm really, really feeling like self-critical and stuff like that, it's because I'm using a yardstick that's not the yardstick of me and where I'm at right now, but I'm using it based on, other people who are my age don't have this problem, or, other people who are, if other people who have gone to, who are educated and college educated don't have this problem, or, you know what I mean? And I'm comparing myself to some kind of faceless group of people where, frankly, there's probably plenty of people my age who are going through this, experiencing what I'm experiencing. And there's probably plenty of people my age, technically, who are educated and who, what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think another thing too about being, because I don't want, what was his name again for the question? What was his name?
Oh yeah, John Drinkham.
John.
So
I don't want
yeah.
John to be like, they didn't answer my question. She didn't answer my question. So the question was, how do you not be critical of your work when your self-esteem is low?
Yeah, how do you honestly judge your work?
How do you honestly judge your work?
Yeah.
That is actually, thank gosh, thank you for saying judge. So the other thing that I wanted to say in addition to that is that I like to think that there are two different kind of ways that you can be critical, or you can kind of exercise judgment about your own work. And I think a lot of people confuse these two things and call them the inner critic, but I actually believe there's kind of two different entities. One of them is the inner critic, who is the one who's always mouthing off and saying things without actually substantiating them. Like, I don't know why you think it. Well, you think you're going to do this. So-and-so's going to laugh at that. La, 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 la. And then there's an entity that I believe we all have too, especially people who are creatives or people who do design or, any kind of, that kind of more visual experience, problem solving, which is what I call the inner evaluator. So, but the inner evaluator and the inner critic are different people. So the inner critic is always going to be criticizing stuff, is always going to find fault, no matter what. No matter how good anything is, they're going to find fault because it's trying to protect you. The inner evaluator is that part of you that is knowledgeable, is seasoned, is skilled, is basically basing their opinions upon what they know what you know to be good, right? And what you know to be like quality, and what you know to be like excellent, right? Yeah. And so when your inner evaluator looks at something, and the thing is also is that your inner evaluator is dispassionate. Your inner evaluator is not trying to kind of poke at your character or say that you're unworthy or you're worthless or you're not a good person because this design isn't up to snuff. All your inner evaluator is saying is, why don't you work on this part? This part needs to be tweaked a little bit, like a mentor or a teacher who knows that you're capable, who knows that you do great work and is just trying to help you get to that place to really express it. That's your inner evaluator is that person. So I feel like we can do something where we actually call upon our inner evaluator when it's time to assess things. So when you've gone through the process of making something, you've fallen in love with the process, right? You've fallen in love with the problem solving, and you're really enjoying that part of the process. When it's at the point where it's complete, or you're feeling complete, or you've gone as far as you can, that's when you can ask your inner evaluator to come out and say, what do you think? The inner evaluator is not trying to make you feel bad about anything. The inner evaluator is looking at something with objective eyes and saying, well, I think you could use this, or, I feel like the colors need to be more vibrant, and there needs to be more contrast, or blah, blah, blah. It doesn't mean you're bad. It doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that you could help it in this way.
That's so good. I'm so glad that you piggybacked your answer on that. And I think that to me, it just kind of boils down to taste also, because we all have, I think every creative person has good taste. I think they do. It just takes a while to develop it. And there's a quote by Ira Glass that it's so good. And part of me is hesitant to read it because it's like probably about 300 words, but I almost want to read it just for the sake of, is that okay, Denise?
Do your thing.
Okay. All right. I'm just going to read this, and I'm probably going to share this. I'm going to do a monologue episode on imposter syndrome and inner critic also, just to even kind of partner with this episode. I put that out there, and a lot of the defenders are like, yeah, do it. So I think I'm probably going to read this again, but I feel like I want to do it here too. But this is so good. Ira Glass, he says, and Ira Glass, by the way, is the host of This American Life, which is probably like for 15 years, it's been like the top podcast in iTunes. He says, nobody tells this to people who are beginners. I wish somebody told me. All of us who do creative work, we get into it because we have good taste. But there's this gap. For the first couple of years, you make stuff. It's just not that good. It's trying to be good. It has potential, but it's not. But your taste, the thing that got you into the game, is still killer. And your taste is why your work disappoints you. A lot of people never get past this phase. They quit. Most people I know who do interesting creative work went through years of this. We know our work doesn't have this special thing that we want it to have. We all go through this. And if you are just starting out or you're still in this phase, you got to know it's normal. And the most important thing you can do is do a lot of work. Put yourself on a deadline so that every week you will finish one story. It is only by going through a volume of work that you will close that gap, and your work will be as good as your ambitions. And I took longer to figure out how to do this than anyone I've ever met. It's going to take a while. It's normal to take a while. You just got to fight your way through.
Mm-hmm.
That's so good, isn't it?
It's so great. And it's so true. And I feel like, your inner evaluator is that part of you that has that taste, right? And it's just closing the gap between what that taste that you have, your aesthetic, what what you aspire to, and what you're able to do. And also to keep getting inspired, to keep adding to that, to keep refining and expanding and kind of growing your aesthetic, right? And knowing, because I love it when I discover things that I'm like, I love that design. I've never seen that before or whatever, but like, I love it when I have that immediate kind of almost visceral response with like, oh, that's so good, Yeah. I love it when I have that, because I feel like it's like I'm discovering more about myself. Like, do you know what I mean? Like as if I am a person that I'm getting to know. And it's like, I just found another piece about myself that I didn't realize was there. Like I kind of knew it was there, but then it's like, there it is, kind of made manifest. And it's like, oh, or when you hear a song that you never heard before and you're like, oh, this is so good. Or even if you hear a song that you used to like, that you used to hear all the time, and then all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, this song is really good. Or I never liked this before, and now I really love it. I love it when you have that, because again, it's kind of going back to that taste, that part of you, that kind of aesthetic, that thing. And then that can inform your work, right?
Yes.
That can inspire and feed and inform your work and inform your creative expression and inform your art, everything.
I love that, Denise. And it makes me think too, and a lot of the listeners are UX designers. They're working on, helping their users accomplish goals, and a lot of them are aspiring. And I think that one of the coolest things that I've learned in this field, and I still have a lot to learn, a ton, but I think one of the coolest things I've learned so far, and a lot of it has been talking to wonderful superheroes like you, Denise, about design, the whole design process. It's, just get it out there. I mean, in the old days, I've been working on the web since 95, 96, the infancy of it. And my first foot in the door was at a really big ad agency. And the way we did things, it was the whole waterfall versus agile. All we did was waterfall in those days. And I remember the contracts would come in and it's like, okay, yeah, this is going to be, $100,000 or $200,000 for this website. And we'll see you in about a year when we're done. And like a year later, we would launch it. And then the client would be like, what the hell is this? I mean, pardon me, but that's what they would be. They'd be like, what am I I looking at here? Because, things iterate and evolve for better or worse. And a lot of it's behind the curtain, right? And the client's like, what is this? What is this thing? And so I just feel like the whole lesson of iterating, and we iterate in our work when we're working for clients, and that's the way we do it now is we don't just wait a year to like show the unveiling of this thing. We work with the clients. We work with them through the process to iterate, prototype, test, and we make it better as we go. And that's, and there's that transparency factor. I just feel like, I feel like the takeaway here for me is we need to iterate upon our lives a lot more. We need to iterate upon our creativity, right? And the only way to do that is to like put stuff out there. The only way to do it is to create and get it out there, die empty, like we were talking about earlier. So that, to me, that was kind of a big takeaway from what you just shared, Denise.
No, it is. And it's, and the way that you do that is by being really aware of your inner critic and those times when you're holding yourself back, when you're judging your ideas and you're killing them before they even see the light of day, when you do something, but you're so self-critical while you're doing it that you basically hold yourself back. And it's kind of like, I say this in one of my keynotes, and I use the imagery of, like a seedling or like just a seedling sprouting from a pot or from the dirt, and saying we all have this amazing potential. And if you can imagine that this seedling is going to become a tree, what kind of tree is it going to become? Is it going to be this like full-fledged, completely magnificent, like grand tree? Or are you going to have your inner critic snipping away at buds that might grow and branches and everything so that it looks more like a bonsai, right?
Right.
And that's what the inner critic does. It takes away, it snips away kind of at your potential and the fullness of your expression. And I wrote this book so that people could have tools to really get to that full expression, to really remove the blocks and to remove the barriers so that they could just so they could just grow and, leaf out and blossom and really trust themselves and trust what they have inside of themselves and trust what they're able to do.
Hey, it's Seth. I'm an author, a blogger, and an entrepreneur, and I run the Alt MBA, and I fight for the users. You're listening to User Defenders Podcast with Jason Ogle.
Denise, you suggest mindfulness techniques to help silence the inner critic's voice. Can you go into some, like maybe techniques, mindfulness techniques that you've personally found helpful?
Yes, actually. So I feel like the biggest biggest and easiest mindfulness technique is the practice of realizing that your thoughts are not you, that they are your thoughts. And not only that, but your thoughts are not only are they not you, but just because you're thinking your thoughts doesn't mean that they're true. Which really changes things, right? Because especially when we're in kind of a tizzy about things, it's really easy to say, I'm angry, instead of saying, I'm feeling angry. Or to say, I'm anxious, instead of I'm feeling anxious. Which just that little change in saying, I'm feeling this way, gives you a little extra distance. It's not who you are, it's just what you're feeling in the moment. And the nice things about emotions is that emotions are temporary. The part of the word that makes emotions is motion, right? They don't stay, they move. And so when you have these moments where you can actually say, where you can start to have the distance between saying, this is not who I am. It is merely what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling now. It is not what I'm thinking and feeling forever. It's what's happening in the moment. Yeah. And then, that you can also look at that, and you can, when as soon as you say, oh, I'm thinking this, then that also gives you extra distance. Every time I do something like that, I feel like it takes me kind of a level higher than my head, so that I'm almost looking down on myself, or that I'm almost looking down in my head and seeing the thoughts moving instead of being caught up inside of the thoughts. Right? And so when the inner critic pops up, I feel like when you go, oh, my inner critic is here again, then you're not attached to it and you're not identifying with it. You're identifying it as its own separate thing that you can detach yourself from, or you can separate yourself or distance yourself from. And then it makes it easier to make other choices in terms of thoughts.
Oh, I love that so much, Denise. I think the psychological term for that is cognitive dissonance, if I'm not mistaken.
I think the cognitive dissonance, I always understood that to be when you're kind of having trouble reconciling two different thoughts or two different perspectives, right? Like you're just like, I thought it was going to be this way, but now it's this way, and I'm kind of experiencing cognitive dissonance. I believe this practice is called self-distancing, or it's kind of part of this kind of cognitive behavioral therapy, where you distance yourself from your thoughts, or you distance yourself from, like you're not identifying with your thoughts. And so then you're kind of like taking a step away.
Yes.
But yes, it's definitely, having the distance and having the perspective and not being wrapped up in the tumults, kind of the emotional and mental tumults. But it's a practice. It's not something that you just go, look, I'm feeling angry. Look at you, anger. Or like, I'm feeling scared. Oh my God, you should be scared. Like, I'm just going to think different. I mean, it's when you're in it, you're in it. Yeah. But I'm sure that you've always, I know I've done this quite a few times when you're crying, when you're really upset about something, and you're you're upset, or you're angry, or you're crying or something. And there's this part of you that's going, oh, look, I'm really having strong feelings about this. And then I just want to cry. I just want to cry about this. And it's like, okay, you could do that. I mean, you could do something else too.
Yeah. I like that a lot. It's the whole limiting belief, I think too, is like when a lot of times we'll kind of do something, we'll mess up, right? Like, not my kids. I use my kids a lot as an example, because they'll be doing something and maybe just not so well, or maybe even cooking eggs or something. Like, I'm bad at this. Like, I'm terrible at making eggs, and I always correct them, and I correct that framing, because that's a limiting belief. It's just that you're not terrible at it. You just are learning how to do it better.
Right.
It's kind of that limiting, and Jim Quick says, our brains are always eavesdropping on our self-talk.
Yeah.
Always. So when we tell ourselves something, and sadly, again, kind of going back to negative influences that can, like primary negative and even secondary negative connections can have on us, they can start to kind of convince us that we really aren't good at something that we might actually be good at. We haven't given ourselves enough time, time to learn, and enough time to practice. So yes. I think it's just kind of that practice thing. Like you just said, Denise, like we just need to keep practicing something. If we're really passionate about something, don't just, hang up your hat after trying it one time. Give yourself some time to, as Ira Glass says, to establish your taste in that thing, and to see if your practice is making you better at it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. And so it's definitely like you may have a time where you're really upset and you don't, the goal is just to recognize that you're thinking thoughts, right? Mm-hmm. That your thoughts affect how you feel. Yeah. And if you change how you think, then you can change how you feel. And to start to practicing the habit, or start to instill the habit of when you're feeling of a feeling that you don't want to feel, to like look at your thoughts and say, okay, I'm thinking that thought. Even just going, I'm thinking this thought, can be something where you go, oh, why am I thinking that thought?
Right. That's not me. That's just my brain thinking that
That's
thought.
just my brain doing
I love
that.
distinction.
Mm-hmm.
That is so important. That is such a great takeaway, Defenders. Your thoughts are not you.
Your thoughts are not you.
Yes, so good.
Yeah.
So Denise, I have one more for you, and I am so appreciative of your time and how gracious you've been with it. I feel like I want to wrap this entire conversation up with asking you, I mean, because you've given so much already, but do you have anything? Do you have something you want to leave our defenders, like your best advice to those, especially who are struggling just significantly with imposter syndrome, aka their inner critic? Anything that would help them just kind of silence that voice, and that voice is telling them they and their work are just not good enough and never will be.
Yes. So two things that I want to say. So the first thing is to say that when you're in the midst of imposter syndrome and you're thinking that somebody's going to find out that you don't know what you're talking about, or that they're going to figure out that you're a fraud at any moment. Yeah. One of the things that I like to institute is something that I call the imposter syndrome paradox. And the imposter syndrome paradox is that you only have imposter syndrome when you're actually really good at something and really skilled. So people who aren't really skilled at something don't typically worry about, that they're going to be found out as a fraud and somebody's going to discover, or that they just got lucky or any of that stuff. It's only when you really are actually skilled and competent that you can experience imposter syndrome. So when I'm having moments where when I'm experiencing imposter syndrome, I think, oh, the imposter syndrome paradox. I wouldn't feel like this if I wasn't awesome.
I love that.
And
that's so good.
And then it usually actually makes me feel better. Like, oh, it's only because I feel great. Okay, that's awesome. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is that I think it's kind of along the lines of what we were saying before, the Ivor Glass thing, and also the growth mindset approach and everything, that just the more you do stuff, the more you practice your craft, the more you kind of creative problem solving you do, etc., the better you get at it. And the more it feels like second nature, and the more it just feels like something that you do instead of something that you're working at or you're aspiring to do. And I feel like there becomes a kind of almost an inflection point or a tipping point where you get to the point where you do it so much that then that that's what you do well, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it just becomes where you're just like, of course I can do this because this is what I do. This is what I do. Right.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, it's like you get to the point where you stop questioning because you trust yourself and you know yourself. And that comes from just doing it over and over and over and over again. So I say take the time to show up, make it regular somehow, and take the time to show up for yourself in that way, to fall in love with the process of troubleshooting, of problem solving, and learning how to figure out, and discover these different problems and find different solutions for them. Fall in love with that. And you'll be so in love with that process that you will be practicing all the time until it gets to the point where you're just like, oh, this is just what I do.
Yes. I love that, Denise. And so there's times when I do this and I'm practicing as well. And there's times when I do this and when I get just a really wonderful, deep answer, like what you just gave to sum it up, where I can't help but just to kind of like, just take a deep breath and just kind of, just breathe it in. And so that's kind of what I just did right there. And I'm just blown away by this conversation, by this deep dive. There's so much. And I know this is going to be reference material for years and years to come. Again, but the crazy thing is, listeners, defenders, this is just a couple hours of conversation. Denise has written an entire book. That dives even deeper into what we've already talked about and even other areas that we haven't even touched on. So I just want to encourage you to get the book. There'll be a link in the show notes. Check it out, get it. You will not regret it. It will make you even better and more of who you are. And and I just want to close with this. And this is something I learned from your book, Denise, and kind of going back to the reason that we don't do as much as we could and as much as we can accomplish in this life and in this world is we're afraid. And there's many things. There's a book, Who Moved My Cheese, where he says, what would you do if you weren't afraid? There's that quote by Mark Twain that I love so much. It just says, we'll be 20 years from now, we're going to regret things that we didn't do versus the things we did do. We're going to regret that way more. And so all of this, kind of brings me to this thing that I learned from you, which is about fear, the acronym of fear. And many of us know the acronym of fear is false evidence appearing real. And I love what you said. You just you kicked fear in the groin in the privates, and you said, let's turn false evidence appearing real into face everything and rise. Yes. Let that be our battle cry, defenders, right there. Thank you, Denise. Right. How do defenders connect and keep up with you? Okay, so my website is denisejacobs.com. You can email me, denise@denisejacobs.com. Follow me on Twitter, Denise Jacobs, easy. Facebook, my Facebook fan page is denisejacobs.com, spelled out, with the dot spelled out. And I'm Denise Jacobs on Instagram. So please follow me on those things. And also, if you want to link with me on LinkedIn, I think I'm Denise R. Jacobs on LinkedIn. You can find me. I'm the one who calls herself a creativity evangelist. I love it. And you are, my friend. And defenders, I'll be sure to put all those links in the show notes. Be sure to check that out. Denise, you are a superhero. The work that you have already done, not to mention the work you're going to do, and that in fact, right after this, you're hopping on a plane to Brazil to do more of this great work. You're making ripples, and those ripples are going to last far beyond your lifetime. I just want you to know that, and I mean that. Thank you for what you're doing, and please, please, fight on, my friend. Somewhere along the way, we stopped coloring outside the lines. At a certain point, quite possibly within the four walls of a public school system, we stopped sharing our art. We stopped playing. We stopped being childlike in the one area we should always strive to maintain it, making and boldly sharing our art. Somewhere along the way, we became afraid. Even though fear is a perfectly normal thing, especially for designers, artists, and creative people in general, we must not let it paralyze us any longer from sharing what we have to offer the world. It took me a while to come to terms with the fact that it's actually selfish to withhold something we can offer others in need that will help them. I'd like to hope this show is that for me. Fill in the blanks for yourself as to what that may be for you. Courage is not overcoming the fear, it's going forward despite it. I love how Seth Godin puts it. We ought to dance with the fear, which is super ironic because I was completely fearful and battling my inner critic the whole time I interviewed him recently. Yet I went forward with it anyway, and guess what? I didn't die. I lived to tell the tale. Funny how our amygdala can hijack us and tell us a story that isn't true so often. I can't wait to share that special episode with you this November. Definitely get yourself a copy of Banish Your Inner Critic. I'll be sure to put a link in the show notes at userdefenders.com/innercritic. And by the way, if you buy it through my affiliate link through Amazon there, you'll be helping User Defenders at no additional cost to you. Tweet your takeaways, Defenders. I'm at User Defenders. Denise is at Denise Jacobs. Also, love to hear your strategies on how you overcome your inner critic, that imposter syndrome voice, and it would be fun to know if you even have a name for yours. I kind of got vulnerable and shared the name for mine. I think it was in this episode, or this part 2, which you just heard. If you're enjoying and benefiting from the show, please, again, consider taking 3 minutes and leaving an iTunes review. I want to thank Eli Jorgensen again for the astonishing artwork. Thank you, Adobe XD, for sponsoring, and be on the lookout in the podcast feed for my very first monologue episode next week. And this one was very meta, as it's all about imposter syndrome, recorded with imposter syndrome. Can't wait to share this with you, Defenders, and until next time, fight on, my friends.